Good morning, DJ and PK. It's 97.5 The Zone. Welcome in on a Friday morning. Coming up today, we got a lot for you. David Locke is going to join us about 8 a.m. this morning. Utah Jazz are at home against the Houston Rockets. Losers of 7 in a row and 18 out of 21. What can be learned? What can be gleaned from these final 9 games? Or the Jazz, who are now, remarkably, just one game out of the 8th draft slot. Should that be the full focus? We will talk with David Locke about that. The Rockets are rolling. They're on a win streak, and they are very close to catching the Golden State Warriors. They have everything to play for. They're in a rebuild. They went, all in, push your chips to the middle, add some veterans to the mix with the young guys, and maybe they can get to the play-in and get to 10th place. It'd be a step forward for a Rockets team that's been way down. So tonight, on paper, looks like the Jazz ought to lose and the Rockets ought to win. The NCAA tournament continues tonight. This may be the last gasp for the western half of America. Gonzaga, the West turns its lonely eyes to you. San Diego State got bounced by the top seed UConn, a rematch of last year's championship game. And UConn, once again, not just winning, thrashing people. 82-52. They beat San Diego State by 30. And they didn't just beat them, they beat them up. San Diego State, they defend and they rebound. It's like UConn's like, hey, you want to see defending and rebounding? We'll show it to you. Out rebounded them 50-29, had 21 offensive rebounds. My gosh. San Diego State gets beat, right? Most college teams going to lose 7. Even good ones lose 7, 8, 10 games a year, whatever. And San Diego State, sure, they fit in that group, and they get beat. And the Aggies beat them, but they don't get manhandled. And Connecticut manhandled them. So Connecticut's winning, 3 games so far in the tournament by an average of 29 points. They've won 9 straight tournament games, 3 this year, 6 last year when they won the championship. And the closest game's been 13 points. They're just destroying people. Somebody may beat them here, but they are destroying people. Up next for them is Illinois. Illinois beat the 2 seed Iowa State, so a Big 12 loss there. The ACC, who had 4 Sweet 16 teams. Clemson upset 2nd seeded Arizona, so the Pac-12 is done in the NCAA tournament. Clemson advances, but North Carolina did not. They lost to Alabama. So at most we'll have 3 ACC teams in the Elite 8. We'll find out with the games tonight. Gonzaga plays Purdue tonight, and as far as the ACC teams, NC State and Marquette, and Duke will try to take down the big dog, Houston. And, for a tournament that's been really chalk, right? The favorites won for, I think it's like the first time in like a decade or maybe even a decade and a half that all of the 1 and all of the 2 seeds advanced. It doesn't happen very often. And they all advanced this year to the Sweet 16. But then it got out of hand. Connecticut won, and they're a 1 seed. But North Carolina was a 1 seed, and they're out. Arizona's a 2 seed, they're out. Iowa State's a 2 seed, they're out. Yeah, the big dogs took some hits last night in the NCAA tournament. All right, also coming up this morning, in addition to David Locke, we're going to be joined by RSL head coach Pablo Mastroeni. Interesting lineup decisions for him because they had 2 guys away on international duty. They had another guy injured. He was able to not start but play and just go like 15, 20 minutes. So if Matt Crooks is back, presumably he starts. Diego Luna returning from playing internationally, and so is Andres Gomez. But while they were gone, Fidel Barajas was awesome. And so that's 5 starters for 4 spots right there because Chicho Arango is going to start. And then you've also got Anderson Julio as a potential 6th starter. Now, Anderson Julio has a history of having soft muscle injuries, calf pulls, groin pulls, hamstring issues, whatever. And so that seems to happen when he plays a lot of minutes. So I think he's the easiest one to send to the bench and just say, hey, we're protecting your health long term. You're really valuable as a sub. And if you play 20 or 30 minutes a night, you're not going to get hurt. But that still leaves 5 guys, and I don't think anyone want to sit. So I don't know what Pablo Mastroeni is going to decide. Possibly one of the guys will come back, really fatigued from playing over in Europe internationally, and that'll buy him a week. So we'll talk with Pablo about that coming up at 8:30. The other thing we have to do today is talk a little college football. The spring camps continue, and for the Utes, Tal Johnson had a role last year, figures to have a much bigger role this year. Tal Johnson meeting with the media, where does he fit? The secondary has to be rebuilt, both at corner and at safety. They had a lot of losses, a lot of guys to plug in. What is Tal Johnson going to do? Here's Tal Johnson with the media.
How do you feel just comfort-wise? Do you feel like you kind of hit that stride now where you know what you're doing and everything's good?
I mean, yeah, slowly just starting to put the pieces together, figuring out like a pre-practice routine, learning what it's like just to be an athlete outside of the football field and checking off all those boxes, watching a lot more film, just trying to get greater even when I'm not on the football field.
When you made the move to defense, did you ever expect this was going to be what it was, or are you happy with how it's turned out?
I mean, yeah, I'm extremely happy with how it turned out. I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Fits me perfectly, if you ask me. And, my whole mentality coming to defense was, I had no clue what was going to happen, what my future held, and I was just going to put my head down and work and let God control the rest.
You're obviously following, examples of like Cole Bishop and guys like that. I mean, what's it like to be able to work with him, but now to be able to kind of take over when he's gone now?
I mean, that's everything. It's being able to learn while they're here, listen and watch their film and watch how they practice and prepare for practice. And then, when that time comes, it's all on me. I've learned, I've sat there, I've sat and watched film with them, and I'm ready to step up and do whatever it takes to fill that role, fill those shoes.
Urban Meyer was up here at a coach's clinic, said that Utah's, watching practice, Utah's one of the toughest programs in the nation. You have a story from maybe when you first got here when you're like, okay, these guys are for real?
I mean, off the top of my head, I don't have a story, just to be honest with you. Maybe I'll think of one as we go on.
But how do the coaches kind of implement toughness in this culture?
I mean, we're full pads, we're shoulder pads every week. It's rare that we're ever in shells, that we're ever in just helmets. Every week we're being physical. Every day we're working on physicality, technique, technicians, all the little things, and every day we work on that. I think that's what makes us great.
So first week of spring, Whit told us about how natural you looked at the safety position. Do you agree? Has it felt like a natural move for you? And how does it feel to have the head coach singing your praises like that?
I mean, yeah, it feels great. I had to test some of that natural ability. My dad was a defensive coordinator growing up. He played safety in college, outside linebacker, so he was a defensive player growing up, and it never really seemed right that I was on offense. Just he was a defensive guy, I was on offense, but it ended up working out, and I think I'm where I'm supposed to be. But yeah, so just watching him growing up helped me make that switch and be comfortable and know how to backpedal and know what it's like to read defenses. And so yeah, shout out to my pops for that. And then what was your other question?
Well, just how it felt that, with singing your praises to everyone about how good you look in, from the first week in spring and new position.
I mean, as a youngin', as a freshman, you strive to be like guys like Miles Battle, Cole Bishop, Sione Vaki, dudes who are big presences in the facility and who are leaders, and then also hearing that, it feels good, and it feels good to be recognized by Coach Whit, but I also have to take it with a grain of salt and understand that, praise never got anybody drafted, and so I'm just gonna try to go out there and play my hardest and do what I need to do.
Where do you feel like, whether in the summer, moving into fall, where do you feel like you need to take that next step to kind of feel maybe comfortable with where you want to be?
Yes, sir. I need to put on weight, and that's one of my biggest things. I mean, since I got here, I came in at like 170 pounds. I'm 197 right now. Trying to get to 205. That's what Cole and Vaki played at last year. So putting on weight and just adding that physicality, more weight, more physicality, easier to hit. And so that, and then also just, you're never not a student of the game. And so just continue learning and being able to process things faster and understand on the fly as I go, just making me better. Yes, sir.
There's the Utes' Tal Johnson. When we come back, we're going to talk Jazz basketball with Steve Luhm. He had a tweet where he talked about that this is the worst. He went on the Jazz beat for the Salt Lake Tribune in the mid '80s, and this is as bad as it's been. They've had seasons kind of like this. I think they've had probably 4 seasons in this range, but this is the first time they've had 2 back-to-back, and I think that makes this worse. We'll talk with Steve about that coming up next. Stay with us. Good morning, DJ and PK. It's 97.5 The Zone. Longtime Utah Jazz beat writer, Steve Luhm still active on Twitter, and he has talked about how bad things have gotten for the Jazz and how down the team has been. Why has that happened? How does this compare to previous times? Steve Luhm visiting with PK and I right here on The Zone. What year did you start on the Jazz beat?
I started, my first year was full-time, 86, 87. So however many years ago that was. The first game I covered,
30.
The Jazz got beat by about 40 in Dallas, and the next night they came home and won. And I said, I don't think this is college basketball anymore.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that'd be 38 years ago. So
Yep,
we saw a tweet you put out that you've seen a lot of Jazz basketball, and you still follow. We can tell you're still a sports fan, even though you're in retirement now. You're still following games, and you'll comment here and there that this is, and you've seen a lot of Jazz basketball, but this is it. This is the basement. This is as bad as it has been. What have you seen that separates this out from other bad times?
Well, I tweeted that out after they lost in Houston and gave up 122 points in 3 quarters. And I just thought that there was no effort. I thought that, Jazz teams in the past, and there have been obviously many games where they haven't played well and maybe they throttle down in the fourth quarter. But I'd never seen a game where start to finish. They just didn't play. They didn't play that hard. And, that's what the NBA sells, fellas. It's competition. That's why the All-Star game now is a joke because the players don't compete.
Right.
You got to compete to be an NBA game, and I thought that night they didn't compete.
So in your many, many years of watching Jazz basketball and in the NBA too, not just the Jazz, because you covered it for so long during all of my time, I think, as I worked my tenure at the Tribune. You were the guy. You saw many teams, many franchises rather than just teams, who repeatedly sucked and they couldn't get out of their own way. They would just make horrendous decisions constantly. And so you look at this group of management team, and, Ryan Smith is brand new, so we really don't know. But you look at Zanuck and Ainge, and particularly Ainge has had a level of success. But right now, it looks like, man, we are in for a long rebuild. When you draw upon your experiences of all the conversations you had with people and then just from your observations, what needs to happen for a team that's in the middle of this thing, or maybe just in the beginning of this thing, to make this rebuild as short as possible?
Well, a simple answer is you need a superstar. This team, I don't think they have a couple of good players. I mean, very good players, but to be a championship level team, you need a superstar. And how do you get that? Well, in the Jazz's case, when I was most familiar with them, they had 2, and they drafted them, and where they drafted them, they got lucky because I believe Malone was 9 and Stockton was 16. So you have to find a player like that. You have to get them to like it here. You have to get them to have the work ethic that those 2 guys did to go from good players to superstar players. That's the route I think the Jazz have to take. In this day and age, do you get a free agent superstar by trading for him with 8 or 9 picks? I suppose that's possible, but I think you have to develop your main guys. And, it's Stockton and Malone were so different that way with how they developed into such great players and such durable players and such players who liked it here. I don't know if we'll ever see it again, but that's what I see. They have to develop their own superstar and then keep them here.
You saw many teams trade for pretty big-time players. I know you were friends with a writer in Houston, and obviously the Rockets supplemented their run and extended the Hakeem Olajuwon era going out and get Charles Barkley. And the Suns once upon a time went and got Tom Chambers. And more recently, when Yao Ming's body was breaking down, the Rockets missed the playoffs 3 years, but they never really got bad. And they went out and got James Harden because the team, Oklahoma City, didn't want to pay him. So,
I'm sorry, Dave.
I was just thinking, shouldn't there be some hope for the Jazz that, hey, this has been going on for decades in the NBA, right? Those are all different eras when those things happen, but that kind of thing's always happening. So while they could draft somebody and ride it, and there's examples of that. There's plenty of examples of star players elevating a team's profile pretty quickly.
That's probably the next step on maybe what I was saying before is you get the superstar, you get the guy developing into a superstar. Now you get the Clyde Drexler and the Barkleys that want to go to Houston to supplement Olajuwon. Maybe that's the road the Jazz have to take, is get that guy who everybody can, the Wembanyama guy who can everybody knows is a superstar. Now the other guys say, I want to go play there. I want to go play there. That's what San Antonio has going. They tanked. They won the lottery. They got this kid that's going to be a superstar for 15 years, and if they keep him there, there's going to be guys that want to play with him. That's probably the route, again, that the Jazz take. Get the young superstar kid that other really good players want to play with and build around him.
There's no question that the two foundation pieces should have been drafted much higher, right? I mean, obviously, it's in retrospect. We know that. First ballot Hall of Famers. I remember once asking you, we were sitting in the old, so far we go back, the old newsroom on Main Street, which is now a theater. And I remember asking you about a particular player, a power forward, and your response, you probably don't even remember the conversation, but for some reason I did. And you said that, well, I really can't tell how he is because he goes up against Malone, and Malone is so good, it's not a fair comparison to evaluate this kid against Malone. And so we know those guys just hit it out of the park, whatever cliche you want to use. But I guess, in a sense, they're going to have to get lucky because the thing that I don't understand, and maybe somehow you could provide better insight, they sort of just put 1 foot into the tank, not 2 feet. And so they're not going to get the super high pick. And that sort of means, all right, you're going to have to get lucky again, I guess, right?
Well, I think you count on these people who are paid to scout these young players coming out of college. You trust them to be able to find somebody at 9 and 16. You do have to get lucky, and therein lies the problem with tanking. Even if you won 4 games, you have a 14% chance to get the number 1 pick. So there's a balance there. You got to compete. You got to keep your fans interested. You have to keep the sponsors interested. But luck plays so much a part into it, and the part that's not lucky is the front office identifying those guys who are picked later, who have the work ethic, who have the background, who have the character, the ability along with it, obviously, to develop like a Stockton and Malone. And that's what you just said. That's not fair because there aren't very many of those guys. But you got to figure that out when you're in the Jazz's situation, and the way the lottery's set up now. You still need that element of luck.
You have interviewed a lot of Jazz fans, and you just know a lot of Jazz fans, and I know there are people wondering how long before the arena empties out, but it's never truly emptied out. It has taken hits at some time, but so many of the tickets now are sold to businesses and then used to entertain clients or reward staffers, and as bad as it's gotten, the arena stays pretty full this year. Do you think that continues just because the model now is the family of 4 isn't buying the tickets? That's not how it works. Brokers are buying tickets, businesses are buying tickets, and then they get parceled out to people who have access after that. Does that keep the place full?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that the you'll never see an empty arena like the Houston game the other night. The courtside seats are half empty, and I think you can see that, especially toward the end of the year. Just out of curiosity, the other day I went and looked online on what some of the available tickets to Jazz games cost. And there's some, I'm sure they're in the upper levels, but there's some like for $15 and $17. So it's a challenge for the Jazz, but I think they're in a market where, and they've had such sustained success over the years that is still in place. I don't think you'll ever see an empty arena. I don't think you'll ever see a half-empty arena for the reasons that you just said. And also, it's just the Jazz in 40 years have become a really ingrained part of Salt Lake City and Utah. And there's a lot of I think a civic pride in them that you don't see in many others. That's probably the advantage of a small market.
Do you think it's easier now to get lucky in the draft? And what I mean by that is, you talk about when you were getting on the beat there and they were hitting home runs in the draft with the two foundation pieces, but, Mark Eaton and Thurl Bailey obviously were great players for them. And those guys, they've played in college 3 or 4 years. And now with the kids coming out over one year basically, and then some of them, going to G League or going to or overseas, it seems like there's more players who are not quite ready to make an impact. So what I'm getting at is they may be more of a project, something like an MLB draft, where you're drafting a kid knowing full well that you're not going to see him paying dividends for 4 or 5 years later on most of their draft choices. So maybe from that perspective, the draft is a little more of a crapshoot, so it might be easier to get lucky. Do you buy that theory?
Oh yeah, really good point. I think they don't. Some of these guys don't have time to show everybody that they're going to be a great player because they play 30 college games and they're in. So like I said, really good point. I think they are out there. You just go back to the word luck.
Yeah.
When you think back to what Jerry Sloan accomplished and the different ways he pushed guys' buttons so that guys stayed competitive most nights, not every night, there were blowouts. Does it amaze you as you look around the league and watch guys taking games off, teams making guys take games off, and then even when they play, sometimes teams just aren't competitive?
I can't imagine what Jerry and Phil and Larry Miller, Pat. Well, all three of us saw this happen. The Jazz would have a bad effort, and Larry Miller would walk by, right, and his face would be red, and there's a little steam trail vapor following him as he charged into the locker room.
Yeah,
and some of the stories I heard from everybody who saw Larry in that situation. I don't know Ryan Smith. I don't know if he's capable of doing that, but Larry would get really mad if the Jazz didn't play at least hard. And I guess where I'm going with that is I think management, I don't know where I'm going with it. When you said that, it made me think of Larry Miller driving into the locker room like a bull. That made me think that it's just a completely different situation now than it was back then as far as expectations and motivations. And I just think that those guys from the previous Jazz coaching staff and management were really good at demanding in a good way that players play hard and try every night, and every game was important. And obviously it's a different era now because that's not true. Every game is not important. Goes back to what we talked about with the fans, goes back and what they accept. And it's just a little different game.
Yeah, what I'm thinking of, Steve, is that Larry Miller put, it's too dramatic to say his life, but his professional life on the line. And this ownership, they really haven't put their professional life on the line. And they're billionaires, and the thing was already set up for them to where open the doors and people flock. And it wasn't that case when Larry built this thing. I mean, you can get all sentimental about it, but the fact is, he had to kind of roll up his sleeves to get the thing where it needed to be. So not to say that Ryan Smith isn't that type of guy, and plus he's still brand new and maybe he's sort of feeling his way, but it doesn't seem like there's at least publicly, maybe there is behind closed doors that we don't know about. And Larry lived his life in the public so often, and certainly emotionally, we can all recite those examples, that Larry had a far more personal stake in it. And I'm sure that the ownership does, but it just seemed a little bit different. And the demand right now doesn't seem as great as it was back then, which that's not to criticize him. It's just I'm trying to assess what you were just saying, and I think that's where you were going.
Absolutely, Larry, and you weren't overstating when you said Larry Miller put his life on the line, because his financial life, absolutely. I mean, $6 million to get in, another $6 million, if I remember the figures right, to buy it outright to keep them from moving. I mean, his financial well-being was on the line when he bought the Jazz, and look what it developed into. The ownership now, they did come into it kind of as the table had already been set. Again, not a criticism, just the reality. And, if they lose a couple $1 million a year in their yearly operation, that's, not that big of a deal. If Larry Miller lost $4 or $5 million the first 4 or 5 years that he owned the Jazz, I'm guessing they wouldn't be here. So it is completely different ownership situation now. Then again, it's a little bit apples and oranges with the product they're dealing with and presenting to the fans.
There's an award, Pioneers of Progress, that's given out every summer, and Gail Miller won it. And I had to do we do a TV story for it, and so I had to do the story. And so she gave up like half a day of her time, and we went different places, different, University of Utah, where they have the scholarship program, the Salt Lake Community College campus in Sandy that they built, and then turned over the keys to Salt Lake Community. And when we were sitting in the arena, I said, this isn't a charitable thing, but it is a community asset. What do you think when she sat here? And I think you're right, PK, about Larry did put his life on the line, because she said that she felt sadness and grief there, because Larry was already pretty much working around the clock when he decided the Jazz had to have a new arena. And she said he started working through lunch hour and skipping meals to build the arena. He knew all the details, famous for knowing how many gallons of water went through the pipes during a Jazz game. I mean, he knew everything about that building. And she said that's when the diabetes really took off, because he wasn't eating, and that has, huge effects on your blood sugar and all that kind of stuff. And so she did draw a straight line to like the Jazz, the arena, and his life.
Well, I think, first of all, I'm a little prejudiced because Gail Miller was always terrific to me. I mean, and what I think she gives back and has given back to Salt Lake and to Utah, just amazing, including apparently, I hadn't heard her say that, but apparently the health of her husband is one of the things that she gave back. So nothing from me that you'd ever hear bad about Gail Miller. Quick story, person I knew in the hospital a few days, a couple months ago up at the University of Utah. There's the Gail and Larry Miller waiting room that you're sitting in waiting, and I was there 4 or 5 days, and it just got me thinking, these are the kind of things that people don't really know and aren't really publicized. So absolutely the Miller family put a lot out there to keep. I mean, Utah, the franchise was on its way to either Minnesota or Miami, if I remember right, in the late 80s. I mean, it was almost a done deal before Larry Miller stepped in. Think of how life changes around here without that. No Stockton and Malone, no Jerry Sloan. Maybe they do flourish in Miami or Minnesota, but certainly there are not statues outside the Delta Center without those people.
Steve, great to catch up. We appreciate your time. Enjoy retirement. Well, I hear you like to golf, so hit them straight.
Well, they don't go very far anymore, DJ, but I'll keep trying.
There you go. Thanks, Steve. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
There was longtime Utah Jazz beat writer Steve Luhm, now retired, used to work for the Salt Lake Tribune. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Ian Furness, the program director, was doing radio here in Utah with PK and I, put our show on the air, put us together. He's the guy who signed off on that and made that happen. Now he works in Seattle, where, and I know there's a lot of changes in college sports, but man, the University of Washington, they're going through change unlike anybody else in college sports. It is really, really crazy there. We'll talk with him next. Stay with us. Good morning, DJ and PK. It's 97.5 The Zone. Ian Furness used to work right here in the Salt Lake radio market. He was the program director when PK and I started the the show back in 2002, and Ian left to go to Portland and then to Seattle, and work in bigger markets, work closer to home. He had family, raised his kids around grandkids, that kind of stuff. We all understand that, and but we've always stayed in touch with him. He's great to have on the show, and he came on late yesterday in the show with a lot of fire, as you were about to hear, with a lot of fire. And we wanted to talk to him about all the changes in college sports, but specifically University of Washington. I mean, they're going to a new conference. They got a new AD and a new basketball coach this week and a new football coach in January. So here's Ian Furness with PK and I. Ian, good morning.
Hostile is a good word to describe that.
That was a very aggressive welcome to the show.
Yeah, boy. A lot has changed after a guy leaves 20 years ago, right? A lot changes.
Hey.
A lot changes.
That's why we're having you on. There's changes in Utah. There's changes in Seattle. Ute fans have a certain amount of I don't know what the word is. What is what I'm reaching for, PK? A certain amount of the interest, buy-in in the Huskies. They played good games. They played a couple of games that you fans will probably be talking about 10 or 20 years from now. And now they go their own ways, and like everything in Washington changes. Now, if we get hockey here and baseball here, that's pretty significant changes, right? And the use of the Pac-12 and BYU to the Big 12, and now the use of the Big 12. We have it changing. But the University of Washington, they're going to change conferences. They get a new idea, a new basketball coach in the same week. And now the football guy's like, I've been here 60 days, and I'm the grizzled veteran. I mean, I know college sports is changing, but the Huskies, this is something special.
Well, the good news is it's Jed Fish, so I mean he could be gone tomorrow. Like I don't know how long his track record says he may not stick around for the start of the season. So he may follow the Troy Gannon route there, AD that was here for like a month. So yeah, they're a treat over there at Montlake. I'll tell you, they're a treat. Those guys.
You're down on my Jed Fish. He went to the same high school as my sister in New Jersey. We're boys.
No, you're not. You're a Sun Devil. What are you talking about?
Well, boys through my and. Not only that, my sister and Jed Fish, East Hanover High School in New Jersey, and she's older than me, and my parents obviously moved west, and I went to high school in Phoenix. My two older sisters are in New Jersey. Not only my sister and Jed Fish, but do you remember in the Bill Clinton thing, Linda Tripp?
Yes.
She went to East Hanover High School.
Wow. That's actually a better reference than your sisters and Jed Fish. That's a pull from the past right there, boys. That's a pretty good one.
Yes.
That is a pretty good one.
Things happen in threes. Patricia Kinahan, Jed Fish, and Linda Tripp.
So what are they going to happen here for Washington? AD, basketball coach, Fish leaves. That's probably it, right? There's the number 3 right there.
That's the third one. And obviously they bring in Sprinkle. And we had heard, I covered the conference tournaments in Vegas, and when I left Vegas on that Saturday of the finals, the Aggies lost the night before, and of course Utah had lost earlier. I knew that Washington was a done deal. I came back for 2 weeks and said it. We put a question up on Facebook. We put questions up on Facebook as we say goodbye to Danny Sprinkle. I put it up on Monday, and then people went after us. It's not official. He hasn't left. Blah blah. I said, well, okay, it is. It's going to happen. Why do you think they made him the number one choice, and maybe even over somebody like a Mark Pope, who's from the area and played there for a year?
My understanding is Pope rubs people the wrong way. Am I accurate in that?
Ba ra rum ba ba.
Okay.
We've heard that. Yeah, we've heard that. You wouldn't know it to watch a press conference. He's very happy and upbeat in front of the microphone and all that. But yeah, we've both heard that separately and together.
Wait, so it's tall, skinny Rick Majerus is back. Is that what it is?
That's a pretty,
I don't know that I know
that's a
that
pretty
level.
Dramatic comparison there. That might be a stretch right there, but I see what you're reaching for. But
if you're talking about a guy that like puts on a happy face for for some media and then is a jerk to others, then that's big man, is it not? I figure,
I think
Pope does that.
No, I think Pope's nice to the local media.
Yeah,
I think he's nice. He jokes around with them on Zoom and all that. So that's not a perfect comparison.
It's internal. I got you. Okay, I got you. I think Sprinkle was the guy because, he was one of the 4 or 5 it coaches this year that at a non-power pro, conference, even though the Mountain West feels like they were in terms of the teams they put in the tournament. But, he was the guy. He's got West Coast ties. His dad played football at Washington, and he kind of checks all the boxes for the Huskies. So Success in the Big Sky, albeit, brief, right? And then obviously very brief success with 1 year in the Mountain West. But, in today's college basketball, I don't think, and Tony Bennett, I'll just give you an example. When Tony Bennett left Washington State to go to Virginia and then eventually win a national championship. When Tony did that, it took him 3 years. I mean, he went to the tournament, his first year as the head coach. Second year, they went to the Sweet 16. And then they got some guy named Klay Thompson. He took a step back and went to the NIT, but then he got the job at Virginia. But, I think there's a little bit of prove it there for him. He may have had an opportunity at Indiana after the second year, but you get my point that, it took a little bit of time. In today's college basketball, you look for someone who can basically control the transfer portal and use it to his advantage. And that's exactly what Sprinkle did, right? I mean, he turned over his entire roster, not by choice necessarily, but turned it over. And, it's funny because that's what Mike Hopkins has done the last few years, and it hasn't worked. He had success early with Lorenzo Romar's guys, who then later went to have no success and just got fired at Pepperdine. But he had success with Lorenzo's guys, some NBA players with Lorenzo, the guys he'd recruited, but he had never succeeded with his own guys. And, I think in the Seattle area, there's an opportunity to recruit people. It's a good basketball market for youth. There's an opportunity there to build a program, but I don't know how many coaches are even, thinking those terms anymore and quote building a program.
How is Washington going to stack up in Big Ten football and basketball? Where do you think they're slotted? Because they're used to – they think they're the big dog, whether they are or not. And sometimes they are. Sometimes they are, but they think they're the big dog all the time. And now you're going to be in a league with Ohio State. Nobody's got more money in Ohio State. Maybe Alabama. I just saw a thing on that. I mean, no wonder they win so much. It's obvious. They spend the most money. So where does Washington stack up with Penn State and Michigan and USC and Oregon and Ohio State?
I hope poorly, but as far as
sugarcoat it, come on, dude, give it to us straight.
I think all things bad for them is good, but in terms of finances, they stack up poorly. That's a fact because their moronic president decided to take half a cut to go to the Big Ten without even a negotiation. The first offer came in, and she's like, yeah, we're taking it, much to the chagrin, by the way, of Oregon, who they were attached to the hip by. My understanding is people in Eugene were less than pleased with her jumping ship before they had a chance to counter or anything like that. So they're making $30 million, which is, a few million less than they even made in the Pac-12, and the travel schedule changes dramatically. And that's half of, they make half. Oregon and Washington, remember, make half the cut that the rest of the conference makes,
right,
in terms of media rights deals. Now, Oregon has a guy, you may have heard of him, Phil Knight, owns Nike.
Yeah.
They can kind of make up for that. Washington, I think, DJ, you said it best. I mean, they think they're the big dogs, and they have this perception of who they are. Push comes to shove, you have to write some bigger checks. I think basketball, they'll struggle. It's a good basketball conference. They haven't been good for a while. Now maybe Sprinkle just goes out in the NIL world. He changes everything, and he brings guys in, and who knows. But, heck, he could go out and if Wazoo doesn't get its act together and get a coach soon and keep guys retained, I mean, that Wazoo roster would be just fine. But they have nothing coming back at Washington basketball-wise. Football-wise, I think they'll be competitive at some point. They'll be competitive, but their roster's fully turned over from the one that went to the national championship game. The best, basically, a bunch of guys going to the NFL, a bunch of other guys transferred. I think they have one returning starter, maybe two total, guys that you wouldn't even have heard of that are coming back projected right now. Will Rogers is your quarterback, who was okay when the late Mike Leach was alive and he was running that offense. He was awful last year. They lose all the receivers. So I think they, Jed Fish, he's greasy. I mean, he recruited Jaden DeLore illegally, so who knows what he's got up his sleeves. But
what do you mean illegally?
You guys never heard that story?
What do you got?
That's one of the great stories.
He told me he took him out on his back patio, and the sun was shining in Tucson, and they looked towards the mountains and said, "Son, I can make you here." And he just said, "Okay, coach." That's the story I heard. What do you got?
Well, he had been charged with sexual harassment and or assault. Those charges later were dropped, turned into a civil case. He also got in trouble on campus. Yeah, and then those charges were coming back up. The assistant provost, or number two to the president, she wanted him out. He also had DUI and some other things going on in Pullman. They wanted him out. Rolo protected him when he was there, and so did Dickert. He wins an Apple Cup, so he's kind of a folk hero. But then he had a falling out with Dickert and the coaching staff, or something happened because they go home for Christmas or playing in the Sun Bowl. And, oh, by the way, he somehow magically couldn't find his way back to meet the team in time to fly back down. Said his flight was delayed. They found out that wasn't the case. Instead of being at practice with his team in El Paso for the Sun Bowl, he was on the campus at Arizona with Jed Fish before the portal opened, before any of that stuff. I mean, it's as greasy and illegal as it gets. And then he quit at halftime of that game, the Sun Bowl. Quit, went in and threw out a bunch of F-bombs to the coaches and said, "I'm out of here." And he quit at halftime, left the team with a backup who was a walk-on that wasn't even a preferred walk-on to play the second half. So that's how Jed Fish operates. That's good. Now, here's the thing. As it turns out, it was addition by subtraction because the guy's just not a great kid anyway. But that's how it operates. So where were we at? Oh, where are they going to be in the Big Ten? Yeah, they'll probably be. They're not going to be bottom third, but I don't think they're going to be upper third, at least the first year.
Well, that's why the AD said, "Screw that, I'm out of here."
Well, he had some. That's a whole different can of worms, PK. Like that's a whole. I mean, you're on the job for 4 months.
Yeah.
The twist there is that he comes in Troy Dannon before he leaves in the middle of the night to go to Nebraska. Comes in for a few months and he loses Kalen DeBoer. Couldn't get him signed to an extension that should have been done in November. If nothing else, an extension where there's a buyout. Didn't get that done. Fires the basketball coach. Now, allegedly did hire, Sprinkle, so we'll see how that works out when it's all said and done. And then off he goes. So, yeah, it's season of change over at Montlake right now for the puppies. But it's all good. If you ask them, everything's good. Don't worry. It's fantastic. We're all good here. So nothing to see. Move on. We're Washington. Bow down to Washington. Here we go.
If you want some Phil Knight stuff, did you see the movie Air about the Air Jordan shoe?
I have not seen it. I need to. I know I'm bad with that stuff.
Yeah,
I'm not.
I think you'll generally know the arc of the story, but there's some specific stuff in there you'll like.
Well, I'll tell you, when I left you guys back in 2002 or 3, whenever it was, I covered a Ducks game like a week or two later, that end of October, early November that year when I first got there and to Portland when I was working up there, and I go in and I was sitting in the press conference in the back at Austin, and the first time I'd covered a Duck game, I was kind of excited. Hey, I'm covering the Pac-12 again, Pac-10 I guess at the time. This is awesome. All due respect to the Mountain West, which I loved, and I get in there. And this dude walks in, stands up, and he starts firing questions at Mike Bellotti in the press conference before any print guys or anybody in the beat guys. I'm like, what the? Oh, that's Phil Knight. Phil Knight apparently gets to ask he was Helen Thomas. He got to ask the first question. and then he got to ask the second, third, and fourth questions, too.
Were they good questions? Were they good questions?
Oh. DJ, the best thing is Oregon struggled that game, and they still won, I believe. But I mean, he had Bellotti on the ropes, man. He was firing away. I think the following Monday is when Bellotti decided to shave his mustache. He was so upset. So yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, Phil Knight. And so every press conference I ever covered with the Ducks football, Phil Knight was always there every single time. Every single time. I should have got on. You know what's funny? Like John Nordstrom, when he owned the Seahawks, and even after on the Seahawks was around, you go up to John and go, "Hey, John, my shoes I got at Nordstrom. They don't. You know what? Bring them back tomorrow. I'll call some. Boom, it's done." I wonder if I would have done the same thing with Phil. Hey, you know what? My Nike cross trainers aren't really good. Well, he probably would have said, "You're cross training?" Really?
Matt Damon plays Sonny Vaccaro, and he has a line along those lines. Phil Knight's getting on it. Do you run? Look at me. You think I run? I mean, it's good stuff, and there's some serious shots fired at David Falk in the movie too. So I think you'll enjoy it, and it really,
I would.
The movie really says that Jordan's mom made it happen.
Yeah,
she made it happen.
Wow.
So it was a good movie. I enjoyed it. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. As always, Ian, that was funny. You made PK laugh like 4 times. So that's outstanding performance by you, despite the rude greeting. You just you came in and delivered.
To make that curmudgeon giggle is pretty.
That's another one.
Man.
When's the NHL coming there? Do I need to send my resume tape down or what? What's going on?
ASAP. I think
who
baseball.
Do you know?
Baseball's
Can you put a word in for me?
End of the decade. Yes. Yeah, I will.
Put a word in for me with the guy who's running the show. Should I just call Locke, or what? How does that work? Is he in charge? Is Locke in charge of that too?
No, I don't think he's going to be in charge of that. But you should, right. If you're interested. It would be awesome. That'd be great. Yeah, I think that it's not completely what's happening here. The whole Phoenix thing is still looming out there. But it could be expansion here, which might take a couple years. But a move, I think you got to. Yeah. I think you have to be nimble and be able to react to immediate events.
I'm there. I'm here. Just again, put a good word in for me, guys. You guys, I'm leaning on you guys to do so. I trust nobody else down there right now. So help me out.
All right. Thanks, Ian.
All right, see you, boys.
When we come back, what is trending? The headlines are up next.